At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Alison, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Hey, it's great to have you here. So let the audience know where you're living.
I live in Scotland. As I look out of my window now, I'm looking across the Firth of Forth to Edinburgh on the skyline. So a lot of people, I suspect, will have heard of Edinburgh, perhaps not where I live.
I will bet that is beautiful.
It is. Today, as we're recording this, we have lovely blue sky and sun, which obviously is not what Scotland is well known for.
So how much sun do you get usually in the year?
I think it's more the heat, so I don't know how to translate it, but I suspect, last year we got a few days where it was sort of mid-20s, but yeah, generally speaking, it'll be around 20 or under 20. I mean, we do get sun. It's just that we get quite a bit of rain as well.
Oh, wow. Oh, well, doesn't sound too bad. Anyway, hey, I would love for you to share with the audience who you are and really talk about your story. What brought you to this point, writing your book and those type of things?
I think what got me to where I am now is my own being stuck. I think things did happen in my childhood around wanting to write and inspire people, but I think I went into a bit of a trough or a rut, really. And then my husband left the marriage, and then I suddenly went, oh, well, what am I going to do? And I'm not very good at being told what to do. So, like all these people with great advice, and it might be good advice as well, but they're well-meaningly telling me, but I will resist any advice being, I want to come up with my own ideas. And which is a bit difficult when you're a bit low and don't know what direction to go in. And so what happened was that I went on a neuro-linguistic programming course and then sort of dived into all sorts of self-development tools and techniques. And the ones that I resonate with are the ones that don't require access to my logic, because logic is what will defend my story. So I know that there are no solutions, that person is to blame, etc. And that's where logic will defend that. And what I discovered, starting the neuro-linguistic program, but also other trainings, was, the power of our inner wisdom to talk to us through metaphor. And so, and therefore, it just became so much easier for me to hear what my inner wisdom had to say, because I wasn't having to bypass logic, because we're sort of sending logic on a coffee break. We're sending the story, everything on a coffee break while I explore, well, I am stuck. What could I do in this situation? But instead of it being, oh, well, you need to go and talk to this person, it's much more likely to be, oh, there's a path, or, oh, don't give up, there's another tide coming, or, oh, look at that little oak, that oak tree sapling. It's really, there's lots of dead wood around here in this wood. Little sapling is just a reminder that there's always new growth coming through. So I think I just found metaphor really easy to relate to, because my logic was sort of turned down, really. So it wasn't defending the story. It wasn't saying I was stuck. It was much more open to seeing the situation from a different perspective. I see it as, when we're stuck, we quite often look into a corner and think, the corner we're, in a room, if we're imagining a room and you're looking into the corner of the room, and when we're stuck, all we're seeing is the two sides of the corner. And a lot of the tools that I use just help people turn around and go, oh, there's a whole room here, or there's a whole load of perspectives that I wasn't looking at.
Okay, so let me ask you the question. You talk about neurolinguistic, and you talk about how you found yourself stuck, And you found that as you started searching ways to overcome that, that this seemed to be one area that really was interesting to you. Could you explain to the audience what neurolinguistic is?
Neurolinguistic programming is just really another metaphor, if you want, that says we run on programs. So we all have habits. So we'll get out of bed in the morning and we'll do things, and we'll do things quite habitually and in particular ways. And certain things will motivate us and certain things won't motivate us. So in some respects, we're a bit like a computer, but we all have our own little software. And sometimes, just like a computer, our software can have unhelpful programs in it, or it can get distorted and it just needs, I suppose, reprogramming. So it could be that I'm fearful of spiders, or I went on holiday last week and the fear of heights came back. So it might be about that, because we can teach ourselves to be scared of things, but we can also teach ourselves not to be scared of them. But I think most of the NLP that I did was more about just being more self-aware that we go around life unconscious, because we couldn't possibly be conscious about every decision we make, because we wouldn't have time. We wouldn't even be able to get out of bed if everything we did was conscious, because then it would be, I've got to move this leg, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, why am I doing that? So of course we have to have programs, which is, this is my breakfast program, this is my going to the car, this is my driving program that allows me to, get from A to B, but also listen to a podcast or something. So we have all these programs, but they're running unconsciously. And sometimes, especially when we get out of sorts, we forget that those programs can be unhelpful. So for instance, bizarrely, when I'm really out of sorts, that I go to watch TV programs that are all about death and destruction and the end of the world, and lots of murder in them and killing, sometimes quite graphically. And is it any wonder that I then start to feel worse? But I do it unconsciously. It's like I have to catch myself doing that pattern to go, no, if you watch, I can persuade myself till the cows come home, which is a phrase they have in the UK, about, oh, I want to watch this program, but I absolutely can guarantee that I will not sleep very well and I'll be quite agitated as a result. And so often that is happening unconscious, that we spend time with people and we're not even aware that those people are agitating us. Or, we might be the fact that, why is it that when I'm feeling down, I always ring X person? I always ring Sally when I'm up. Well, that's because she makes you feel better. When you're feeling down, perhaps you ring somebody else. So for me, neurolinguistic programming just brought it out into sort of visible, so I could see the patterns, because then I've got more choice. So I have a preference for doing this. That's not helpful, or it is helpful. I can find things that, when I'm feeling out of sorts, going for a walk will always happen. So let's put that on the prescription and make it conscious. I've noticed I'm feeling out of sorts, I'm going to go for a walk.
Okay, so with NLP, I had a very interesting experience with that. I was working with a client who came to me and said, Doug, I'm just really making bad decisions. And I keep doing it, even though I know I shouldn't. And so we went through a neurolinguistic session with him. And as I did that, we got back to that early childhood and discovered some things that had occurred to him while he was in grade school. And as we identified that, reframed it so that rather than him thinking that he was stupid or he wasn't good enough, it was really, you know what, we're really talking about the teacher here and their ability to communicate how they should. And once he got that, and then we came forward into the present time, it was fascinating as he told me months later what a difference that made in his life, the changes he made, the decisions he made. So for folks that are wondering what NLP, neurolinguistic programming, NLP is, it's not necessarily, at least I don't understand it to be something that you can do on yourself. I really think that it's something that you need someone to help you with and to guide you, because that makes it so much easier and oftentimes helps you get to the right place where you don't necessarily find that place if you're doing it on your own. Do you disagree with that? Did you do it on your own, or did you have someone guide you through the NLP process?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I did a master practitioner, trainer training of NLP. So absolutely, I've had people around me. I think there are some tools that are easier to do on our own. And I think perhaps that's where a lot of the metaphors come in, because it's about any process where you're just doing it in your head for yourself. You've got half of you going, giving yourself the instructions, and the other half answering, and that's very difficult. Whereas if you can get the process out in front of you and you're drawing it, it's much more easily to go to the instructions and go, all right, I'm going to draw this now. And the other thing is for some of the metaphor stuff is you can't talk yourself out of it, because the benefit of having you there to help that person was if they then started to go, oh, but that isn't true, it was much easier for you to go, really? How might this be true? How might it be more about the teacher than it was you? And sometimes it's harder to do that sort of conversation for ourselves. So I think it depends on the technique they're using as to whether it's better with somebody else. I think it's about how easy you find it to not get caught up in your own thinking and believe it to be true, because the example you've given, it requires us to change our mind. And beliefs, you mentioned beliefs and values are much harder to change than our behaviors. And yet a lot of our behaviors are linked to beliefs and values. So yeah, if we're looking at values and beliefs, such as the example you gave, then it's going to be easier for somebody else to be asking the questions, because they can stop you going off on tangents and getting lost in the detail, really.
Okay, and so without getting into the content of your book, what is the name of your book and what motivated you to write it?
Can't See the Wood for the Trees is the name of the book, Landscaping a Life to Get Back on Track. And I'd always wanted to write a book. And I suppose I'd tried various different, I also knew it was going to be around using nature as a metaphor for our lives. And I just kept trying. It's that whole, oh, this is the book. Oh, no, that's not the book. So I'd sort of write, a few chapters or even the whole book, really. So I'd gone through about 3 or 4 iterations, but certainly in an age before social media as it is now, then using metaphors quite difficult. These days, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, it's much easier to be able to use metaphor and people to grasp it. But that isn't where I was at when I was writing those books. But I think so I kept wanting to write a book. But the book that got published was when I realized that I'd found one that would resonate with more readers, because I think the books I'd written previously were very, very niche, and you might have only had a handful of readers. Whereas the book I've written is much more, here's how I can use metaphor and apply it to things that people are doing anyway. So people are already saying they're stuck in a rut, or they're going round in circles, or they're like a fish out of water, or here in the UK, we'd say can't see the wood for the trees. In other areas of the world, it might be can't see the woods for the trees, or can't see the forest for the trees. So I think it was just keeping on, knowing I wanted to write a book and keeping on writing the book until such time I found one that I thought would resonate more.
Okay, and you talk about metaphors, and you just listed a few, but would you explain to the audience what you mean by metaphor? And then how can an individual use metaphors in their life consciously to literally be able to make a change in their lives?
Well, I think the first thing is we're using them all the time. So some of it is, again, going back to conscious awareness that said, oh, I've just used a metaphor because I've just said something is like something. So I've just said I can't see the wood for the trees. So that's not a logical thing. It is a metaphor that we are using to depict for other people so that they understand what's happening. And we quite often use metaphor because it's richer. It's like, if I was to tell you about my problem, I might be here for 30 minutes, still giving you all the detail. But if I say, I can't see the woods for the trees, or I'm going round in circles, you get a real sense of what I mean with only that one sentence. And we do it, it's like I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. It's an uphill struggle. We convey so much because of that. But it's a metaphor because we're not stuck between a rock and a hard place, really. But the metaphor we're suggesting is it is like that. And so we're doing that all the time. And so therefore, my suggestion is we use the metaphor in our language to get back on track, because if it is like we can't see the wood for the trees, then my suggestion is, what would you do in a real wood? But in terms of sort of going back to your first question about a metaphor, is if we go back to when I first used it in earnest in business, was when, and this is why metaphors are really useful, because we might not know anything or know how to solve a particular problem, but we might know something about, loads about something else. So my sense would be, if you know a lot about cars, then, and you've got a problem, how is your problem like an engine? How is your car about, how is your problem about driving? Because you know more about driving, that you'll then be able to go, oh, I just need to change gear. Oh, I just need to change the tire. So when I used it, was we were in business and procurement professional, purchasing, and we were trying to convince these managers in the organization that they needed to pay attention to supplier management. And, they were bored. It's like, we're talking about supplier management. And they're going, yeah, we're already doing it. Go away. But as soon as I start, and they weren't, I mean, we've got a lot of supplier problems, but they believed they were, because they didn't know anything about supplier management and they believed they knew all of it. Until I said, well, what do you know about gardening? Oh, well, gardening, we need to think about where we put the plants. The plants need the lawns need mowing, plants need pruning, watering, feeding, time in the greenhouse. We might even have a compost bin. And when I said, so all of what you know, so you're telling me, we've got problems with suppliers, and you're telling me all of this about gardening. If I tell you that looking after suppliers is exactly the same as looking after a garden, they just, when it was a bit like going from beginner supplier management to going for a degree in supplier management, because they suddenly knew so much more about, suppliers need, you mean I shouldn't just plonk a supplier in the corner of the garden and leave them to it. That's why we have problems with suppliers, because we need to give them some attention. So I think metaphors are great because we know something. So if somebody's really into some sport, they can use that sport as a metaphor for their problem. How can they apply tennis to that problem? How can they apply, going back to the earlier example, a car engine to their problem? Because we know more about, we have areas of expertise, and we'll always be able to go, but it is a bit like that.
So as you were talking, you obviously were talking about your business experience. So what came to my mind is I was thinking, how often as parents do we talk to our children as they're facing challenges and try to help them, usually by giving them our opinion, which is not helpful, and I'm guilty of that with my kids. But just imagine for a moment if, as a parent, we could literally learn to use metaphors in helping our children, either when they come to us, which sometimes they do, oftentimes they don't, or when we're observing that something's happening, and if we can sit down and get into communication with them and then use a metaphor, it seems to me that does a couple of things, and I'd love your opinion on this. Number one, as you say, it allows them, and in a metaphor that they would understand, it allows them to focus on a third entity rather than themselves, number one. And number two, rather than feeling like they're being criticized because an opinion is being given, all of a sudden you have this external metaphor that you're talking about, and then seeing whether they can then understand what you're saying and how it might apply to the challenge that they're facing. What are your thoughts on that? And have you ever talked?
Definitely. Definitely. And I think the other thing is that when we're giving people advice, we're sort of forcing something on them. So even if we're metaphor, it's really interesting that we can think somebody needs a path out. You need to find a path, or you need a map. And what they notice, because I quite often go for what I call landscaping your life walks, and we'll take the problem on a walk. And I'll invite them to see things in the landscape that reflects their problem. And I might be there thinking, oh yeah, I know where this is going. And it never does, because it's their unconscious that's noticing patterns that make sense to them. So I can ask questions about what do you notice, and what happens if we go this way, and what happens if we go that way. But I've just learned to be very careful about imposing. If I go in a group, then quite often what happens is that one person's busy telling this other person, oh, well, it's quite clear, it's this. And it's like, well, yeah, but that's not where that person's going to be looking. So you can't impose it, but their inner wisdom will help, because you're basically saying that landscape, in my instance, is similar to your problem. How is it similar? And they'll come up with their own, what the brain will do it. It's like, in what way is this problem similar to your favorite sport? And you'll absolutely be able to do it. If you're into cooking, how is your problem similar to your favorite meal that you're cooking, or when you're cooking a new meal? And people are able to see it. I mean, it is interesting though, because I tend to not want to go down the routes of sporting ones, because I don't know anything about it. So it does restrict my ability to ask questions. Whereas because I use nature as a metaphor, then I'm much more aware of, day following night, the seasons, tides, how things grow, harvesting, etc. So it's much easier for me to be able to ask questions. But it should apply to any, quite often people use fairgrounds, for some unknown reason. So it could be, how is the problem, what ride in the fairground is your problem similar to? Oh, it's a helter-skelter. Oh, it's the,
Okay, so let me ask you a question. Let's say I really am facing a challenge right now in my life. I'm just frustrated. I find myself get angry, and I can't really relate to why it is. And what type of nature metaphor would you take me through in order to help me to understand the fact that anger and frustration literally is not a healthy way to be?
Okay. I don't know that I'd ever tell you that anger and frustration isn't the way, but the common theme of using a metaphor is that anger and frustration disappears. Because the anger and frustration is normally because we can only see 10% of the solution, 10% of the situation, and therefore we're focusing on that 10%. And therefore metaphor enables you to see the bigger picture. And more commonly, it's like, oh, that's better. Right, now I know what to do. But the way I do it depends on where we are. So quite often I'll be out in nature with somebody, or they're out in nature at the other end of the phone, and I'll just be saying, so walk. I don't want to talk about the current situation, so I don't ask for details of the current situation, because that will just get them more, that will enable them to access anger and frustration. So it's like, I do not want to access the state of stuckness. We've been in that for long enough. We know how the anger feels. We know how the frustration feels. Let's park that. And then let's look at it metaphorically. So if we were outside, I might just be asking, dependent, if we go back to that person who's got a decision to make, it might be that I ask at every crossroads and the paths we're on about them to make a decision. Which direction do you want to go? So it might be about the patterns there. Somebody once was every junction we came to, they chose the path that wasn't signposted, where we didn't know where they were going. But that was huge insight for them, because they their work was much more about new product development, and they hadn't realized that was what motivated them. Sometimes it might just be the fact that somebody noticed a tree, they might notice a path, and we have a conversation about how that helps them, gives them some insight about the situation. But the quickest way, I suppose, if we were on the other end of the phone and we didn't have access to nature, would be for me to say, and people listening can do this, is if your current problem was a mountain, draw the mountain. So they could put us on hold, go and get a piece of paper, pen, and then come back and then draw it. And I'm not suggesting they spend the next half hour drawing the mountain. It's just, now the reason I use mountain, you could use any landscape. And this comes back to the difference between the example I'm giving you is easy to do on your own.
Okay.
Whereas, yeah. So the example I'm giving is much easier for somebody to do when I can't see what they're doing.
Right.
Which is draw the mountain. And it's going to take you 1 or 2 minutes. So you're either done it now, as I've been rabbiting on, or you can just pause us for another 30 seconds until you've finished drawing it. And just draw the mountain. Just notice how big it is, what the sides are, how tall it is. Did you have to use coloured pens? What's the top like? What's the bottom like? Just to notice what you notice. So that's the mountain that we're saying depicts the current situation. And the chances are, if somebody looks at that mountain, they understand why they can't see solutions, because it'll be barren quite often, and it might not be. So, I mean, these are stereotypes rather than specifics. So it might be very, very slopey sides, very steep sides. So what I'd now would ask those of you that are following on is to either make changes to that mountain or start with a new mountain. What would the mountain that had the solution within it look like? So it all depends on what the solution is as to whether you have to start with a new mountain or you can make changes to the current one. So that might be changing the colour of your pen. It might be about adding paths. Quite often it is about adding paths. Sometimes it's about adding in signposts. One person had a real aha when they went, oh my God, I'm not in the picture. Now, I don't have to know, and nor does anybody listening need to know, well, why on earth would adding themselves into the picture make a difference? It doesn't matter. It did for that person. They were able to, by adding themselves into the picture with the mountain, because using another metaphors just open doors in your brain to the solutions. Because if you're stuck, I absolutely believe you have the solutions. But currently, the doors to those solutions in your brain are closed for whatever reason. The anger, frustration, whatever the reason is that we're keeping our access to the solutions, the doors closed. So using metaphor, just by adding that person in, adding a path to your mountain, changing the colour of it, making it less steep. I had somebody adding in tents. Somebody else added a guide to help them up the mountain. Somebody else realised, oh, I'm trying to climb the mountain with the wrong shoes on. I haven't got walking shoes on. So, and we could jump to what we think that means, but it doesn't really matter as long as the person doing the drawing has gone, I felt frustrated and not knowing what to do when I drew the first picture. And as a result, oddly enough, of changing that picture, somehow I feel different, and I now have access to solutions that I didn't have before I started thinking about my problem as a mountain.
Do you find that drawing, because I know that's one of your main focuses, do you find that drawing a picture, like you just suggested, is one of the best ways for an individual who finds themselves stuck to be able to draw a mountain or draw whatever in a way that all of a sudden they can start to understand how to get unstuck? Is drawing one of the main solutions?
I think some people have got a belief. So this again comes back to whether or not they're doing it on their own or not. Because if they've got a belief that they're not a great drawer, they're going to be trying to draw it with a belief that's going, I'm not a great drawer, this isn't going to work. So I think it depends on people's relationship with drawing. If it gets you into a more playful, oh, I'm just there, I'm like a child, there is no right or wrong, nobody's going to judge this mountain, then it's more likely to be. It's my quickest one, certainly if I'm not there, because it's easier for people to do and not necessarily go off at tangents and start doing things wrong. My preference would be to get people out into nature, but that is harder to do on your own. There are instructions on my website about how to do it, but it is, and the podcast that I do is exactly that. It's, if you feel like you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, I go out into nature and get stuck between a rock and a hard place and encourage you to do the same in order for us both to get insight about what's really going on. But it's a bit harder to do, which is why I do it in the podcast episodes, really.
Well, and does your book help to explain that? So, for instance,
Yeah.
I practically get up every morning and I go out walking,
Oh, wow.
for 3, 4, 5 kilometers. And during that time, it's, interesting. I walk around, and because I'm in Thailand right now, there's trees, there's, a
Lovely.
number of rice fields and so forth. There's even a Buddhist temple that I walk by.
Cool.
How would I use that? How would I use that ability to walk like I can, and going through those different locations? If I wake up frustrated about a certain situation and I want to resolve it, and I'm going, okay, I'm going to go for a walk. What do I do on that walk? What do I observe? How do I observe in a way to start to remove that frustration and find a greater sense of peace, which I believe once I find that, the solutions will come a little bit easier.
Yeah. The biggest challenge, I suppose, is the fact that the first thing I would do is that invite you to park the problem. So it's like, if you're worrying about a particular situation, it's okay, and this is where our logical mind needs telling that this is what we're going to do, is, dearest logical brain, we are going to go for a walk and we're going to apply more metaphorical, look at it metaphorically. So I'd like you, logical brain, not to keep playing the story. So we are sending you, logical brain, and the story on a coffee break. Now, I know I'm emphasizing it a lot, but it is really important, and it's something I say in the book, and it's something I have to do repeatedly if I'm walking with somebody. Because what happens is, we see a path, we see a signpost, and we start trying to translate it immediately. Oh, I need okay, I need a signpost. I'm not looking for the sign. I don't know where I want to go or whatever. And we automatically jump into thinking that's the solution. So the biggest thing is, we're going to park the story and actually invite our brain not to regurgitate the story for the whole walk. And then if we need to, we might need to write what we notice down so that we can retell it later, so that we see it. And sometimes it's become obvious. But the idea is to just go for a walk and notice what you notice. So it might be that it's a walk, sounds like at the moment it's a walk you may have done frequently. So what is it that you notice differently? Oh, I noticed that tree. I've never noticed that tree before. What is it about that tree? So somebody at the weekend suddenly realized there was this oak tree, and they were talking about this oak tree, and there were lots of saplings that she was noticing because she'd got very frustrated about nothing was happening. And so these saplings to her afterwards were a reminder that, oh, we don't always see growth. I mean, the acorns fall to the ground, they go down, they then sprout. It might be a while before they become trees. But what she also noticed, and this was about 20 minutes in, and we'd just been talking about the oak trees and everything, was she noticed that the oak trees were in a circle with 5 other oak trees. So you'd sort of notice, you'd notice the sapling. So if you've not got a great memory like mine, you might write it down. So it's like, I've noticed the saplings, I've noticed the oak tree, I've noticed that the oak tree is in a circle. It might be that you notice paths, but it's to try and immerse yourself in the landscape. Now, what you could do is go, what part of this landscape represents my challenge? And you might go, oh, it's that. Yeah, it's that. And then it's just about going, well, what would the solution look like? What would I need to do to eradicate that landscape? So it's a bit difficult because everybody will do something different. But the chances are that the patterns you notice, when you then get back, you can go, oh, I got lost. Well, how did I get unlost? So it's sort of about telling the story of the walk through the patterns. Oh, well, I got so far and then I got lost. Why did you get lost? I got lost because intuition said I should go right, and I decided I was going to go left because I wanted to go the difficult route or something. So it's just about replaying it, but replaying it with the patterns. It's like, what decisions did you make? What did you notice? What are the patterns that you notice? And it's in that exploration that our brain convert, because it is our inner wisdom talking to us. It is our inner wisdom allowing that person at the weekend to notice that those trees were in a circle, and that actually what they were missing was a collaborative, they were feeling quite alone, and actually they weren't alone, and they needed to ask for help of this little mini community.
Well, and do you find, I mean, as you talk about that, I'm thinking, wow, that really takes a mindful approach to that walk. When I get up tomorrow morning, it's got to be just a really mindful approach to this walk. How do you help people, and because they can't be with you all of the time, obviously, and how do you help people to be able to become mindful enough and focus enough to be able to use this process that you're talking about in a way that really does help them to work their way through these problems, and in many cases, work their way through these limiting beliefs that have been affecting their lives for so long?
My experience is, the way I describe it is, a lot of people that come to me are stuck in a rut, or they're stuck and I help them out of it. And once they're out of it, they have the skills needed to then use this process. And so therefore that's what happens is, so I had an email from somebody, and at the time she's saying to me, all right, let's arrange another session in 3 months' time. And I'm thinking, you don't need it. But she, yeah, we'll put it in the diary. I'm thinking, all right, we'll put it in the diary. But I sort of penciled it in the diary with a unlikely. And absolutely, the week before, oh, I don't need it because this has happened. And literally, the story she's telling me was of how many things had changed, how she was able to look at things differently. So I think I see what I do as opening people up to hear their inner wisdom. And once they've heard the whispers of their inner wisdom, they're not going to forget how to do that. And so somebody might come back once a year to say, oh, can we have a bit of a refresh? Or because they'd like me to be asking questions of them rather than themselves. But I think that's the hard bit to convey, that once you've heard the whispers of your inner wisdom, you're just going to be really excited about, oh my God, there's this part within me that does know what to do, and I've now got I just need to go for a walk and hear it. Or if it's not go for a walk, I need to draw it or do a collage. And yes, the book does give you, for every phrase that you might utter, 4 or 5 different ways of exploring it. If you're out in nature, if you're not out in nature, drawing, imagining it in your head. So there's lots of different techniques to do it. But the sense I have is, once you've experienced it once, you're not going to forget that.
Okay, so how do people find your book, number one, and how do people find you?
Can't See the Wood for the Trees is available worldwide. The tagline is landscaping your life to get back on track. Landscaping your life sometimes is the easier mechanism if you're doing a search, because for whatever reason, with the apostrophe can't, then some search engines just fall scroll down. So Landscaping Your Life would find it. The website is alisonsmith.co with nothing else after it. But the easiest way is just searching Landscaping Your Life, because Landscaping Your Life is the podcast. It's the tagline in the book. It's the hashtag I use on all social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, etc. So yeah, Landscaping Your Life. And if you added in Alison or Alison Smith to that, you'd find where all different places that I'm available. But I think if somebody's gone, oh yeah, I'd like to try that, I think the book does it. And I'm not trying to persuade somebody not to buy the book, but if they go to the podcast, they could then, there's 64 currently podcast episodes, and they can go and choose the one that resonates with how they're feeling. Oh yeah, I'm feeling like I'm going round in circle. Yeah, I'm feeling like I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. And then I talk them through the process, and yeah.
Oh, wonderful. So your podcasts actually focus on those different challenges. Oh, that's wonderful to hear.
Yeah.
That's wonderful to hear. Well, as we close today, what would be a message that you really want to share with the audience, that as they finish up, that this is something that will stay with them and they'll think about?
I think the fact that nature doesn't have musts, sorts, and shoulds. So you can't tell a daisy, look, you should face that way. That, the daisy is going to face this way because that's what allows it to flourish. And nature has patience. It's like we expect immediate returns these days, and yet plants, you plant a seed and you don't keep poking it, it's not going to grow. You just got to give it the right conditions, allow it to grow, and and then it will grow. But sometimes we sort of think it's going to grow without the right conditions or going to happen immediately. So I think it's look to nature's patience and the order of things, that if we let go of some of the must, sorts, and shoulds in our lives, then we might find ourselves going off at different directions, but they're directions that would give us more joy and passion in life.
Well, I love it. Well, Alison, thanks so much for me. This is fascinating. I'd love to take a look at that book, because I think that, being able to figure out, and I love your concept of metaphors. I think that whole process of being able to use metaphors, and as we said, for yourself, and then also as you're in communication with your family, with your loved ones, or in business, or wherever it happens to be, recognizing that using metaphors takes away some of the resistance from the other individual that you're really honestly trying to help. And it allows you to help them to start to think for themselves and to come up with a solution, which, as you and I both know, is really the way that you can be helpful, is allow them to come up with the solution. So anyway, Alison, thanks so much. I really appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you. It's been great.
You bet. And folks, thanks for listening. I hope you got something out of this. And please go to the website and see what gives you some ideas and thoughts about your own life. Appreciate it. Anyway, this is Dr. Doug saying have a wonderful week and namaste.